In the distant past, all the earth was covered by deep water, and the only living things there were water animals. There was no sun, moon, or stars, and the watery earth was in darkness. Sky beings lived above the great sky dome. A tree of life grew there in the cloud world, where it shaded the councils of the supernatural beings. One day the great chief became ill, and he dreamed that if the tree was uprooted, he would be cured. He further commanded that his pregnant wife, Sky Woman, look down at the watery darkness. He told her to follow the roots of the tree and to bring light and land to the world below. The animals from the sea saw Sky Woman as she fell from the sky world. Waterfowl rose to cushion Sky Woman's descent with their wings. Beaver dove to find earth to make dry land for Sky Woman, but beaver drowned and floated lifelessly to the surface. Loon, duck, and others all tried and failed as well. Finally, Muskrat tried, and he came back with a paw full of dirt that would spread and grow. He placed the dirt on Turtle's back, where Sky Woman landed. The dirt on Turtle's back grew and became the earth. Time passed, and Sky Woman gave birth to a daughter. The daughter grew rapidly, and when she reached maturity, a man visited her. He placed 2 arrows on her stomach, one tipped with dirt and the other not. The daughter, in turn, bore twin brothers. The left-handed twin was Sawaskera, mischievous one, and the right-handed one was known as Teheran Hayawako, holder of the heavens. The left-handed twin forced himself out through his mother's armpit, killing her in the process. Corn, beans, squash, and tobacco grew from her body, and she became one with the earth. Teheran Hayawako created animals, medicine, and flowers, while Sawaskera created the thorns of the rose bush and the mountain lion to kill the deer his brother created. After much fighting, the brothers decided to divide the world in half. The nighttime would belong to Sawaskera, and Teheran Hayawako would get the daytime. The Ongwe, original people, were created by Teheran Hayawako out of the red earth, and were to watch over his creation on earth. Black soil, tree bark, and salt water were used to create other beings. Teheran Hayawako told the beings that he was to be called Sonkwai Itasan, the creator, and that they were to be respectful to one another and all living creatures. He instructed the people to appreciate each other's differences and to share the world. So it is that the Ongwe came to this place. Long before European colonists settled here and renamed it after their native home in England, people known as the Susquehannock lived in large towns, their inhabitants numbering in the thousands. These towns were agricultural centers where large fields of beans, squash, and corn, collectively known as the Three Sisters, were grown. They preserved their crops in pit granaries, allowing the settlements to weather the winters and remain in one place for 20 to 30 years. At a time when the European diet was poor due to lack of nutritional diversity, leading to rampant vitamin deficiency, crooked bones, and severe tooth decay, the Three Sisters, combined with plentiful foraged fruits and berries and protein sourced from both the rivers and the woodlands, provided a rich and complete diet for the Susquehannock. Alongside food crops, they also grew medicines, the most important of which was tobacco, which was used ritually and in prayer. The Susquehannock were an Iroquois people linguistically and culturally. Although they often clashed militarily with the Haudenosaunee, erroneously known as the Iroquois by colonial people, they spoke a similar language and organized their societies in similar ways. While Algonquian people, such as the Lenni Lenape to the east, lived in small round houses, typically known as wigwams, the Susquehannock built large longhouses which could house 20 or more families, all related through the mothers. These large extended families formed clans, which organized the community both socially and politically. One could not marry a member of one's own clan, so in order to preserve matrilineality, upon marrying, a man would leave the clan and longhouse where he was born and raised and join his wife's. Women controlled the longhouse and therefore controlled the internal politics of the entire community. They decided where to farm and how food was to be distributed. They delegated responsibility for diplomacy to men, choosing who would represent their clans and communities. And while men were charged with negotiating peace and declaring war, the clan mothers retained veto power on all decisions. Each Susquehanna community was the center of a much larger territory. Near the village, fields were cleared by the men and then farmed by the women of the community. After clearing the fields and constructing the longhouses, the men were charged with fishing and hunting, providing the protein for the community. Likewise, men were charged with traveling long distances along an extensive network of roads and paths connecting communities for trade and diplomacy. These roads were more than just avenues designed to aid travel. Different roads were politicized and used for different purposes. Traveling down one road signaled a desire to make peace or enter into trade. Traveling down another signaled one's desire for war. Symbolism and metaphor were essential for maintaining good relations. Just as paths and roads were symbolic and not just utilitarian, so too were the words one used to greet one another. This was especially true when it came time for diplomacy. Ancient and strictly prescribed liturgies were recited in order to ensure that all present were in the right mind. The edge of the wood ceremony, for example, ensured the guests were treated hospitably, but also informed of the proper behavior that was expected of them, and was therefore recited any time a visitor approached a village or council fire. We now take the softest deer skins, white in color, and wipe away the dust that may have accumulated in your eyes upon your travel here, so that you may be able to see all that the Creator has provided for us here on the earth, and that you may be able to see clearly the generations ahead of us. Secondly, we now take this white feather from the eagle, the softest down of white feathers, and we brush away from your ears all the dust that may have accumulated upon your travel here, so that you may be able to hear the words that our people convey to you, and that you are able to understand clearly when you are asked to make a decision based upon what you are able to understand of the issue presented. Now we stand you up and brush away all the things that may have accumulated upon you from your travel. We start from your head, all throughout your body, right down to your feet. At this time we say to you that you are now welcome, that we now welcome you into our territory, and that you may stay as long as you like. We ask that you be mindful of the ways of our village, and if you cannot obey these rules, we have no other resources but to tell you that you must move on from our village. Leave as soon as you hear this message, for we will not be able to aid you after this. Just be aware that you will no longer be under the protection of our laws. Now at this time, we will go around and greet you, and shake your hand and welcome you to our village. When the handshake is done, you will be given the chance to speak and tell us your message. After we have had time to take in your message and consider your purpose, we will let you know how we feel about the message that you carry. When we are satisfied with your message and purpose, we will then release you of your duties. As we've said before, you may stay as long as you like, but do not stray from our rules. The liturgies passed down for generations by knowledge keepers were accompanied by gifts. The most important were strands and belts of wampum, made from the purple and white beads formed from quahog and whelk shells. These strands would often stand in for other tools used in the ceremony, such as the wiping of eyes and clearing of ears. They would be kept as proof of the agreement made. The very strands were words of consolation and solace. Larger belts would be designed with symbols that further illustrated the terms of the agreement. When Europeans first arrived, they entered into a pre-existing world of social and political metaphors and liturgies. Famously, for example, when Peter Minuit arrived on Manhattan, he reportedly bought the island from the Lenape for a handful of beads. While the records of this exchange are scant, if beads were exchanged, they were not traded in a system of barter. They were part of a symbolic exchange, steeped in meaning that surely was lost on the Dutch. Thus began a long history of colonial entanglement, misunderstood liturgies, greed, missionary zeal, and land hunger that would lead to the dispossession, enslavement, and and murder of the first people of Turtle Island. Missionaries, of course, arrived with liturgies that they held dear. Unlike the first people, who often saw foreigners, whether European or indigenous, as subjects of separate creations and creators, Europeans believed that one creator created all things, and it was the duty of every believer to convert those who did not believe the same things. Europeans therefore justified colonization and conquest as a tool in the conversion of savage souls. Initially, the Spanish benefited from the unintelligibility of their own requerimiento, a liturgy that was recited in Latin without interpreters to Indians. The requerimiento declared that the land was rightfully God's. Furthermore, Indians were instructed to submit to the Spanish as the representatives of God's church and its chief, the Pope. If they failed to do so, Indians were subject to violence, slavery, and death. However, as reports of mass enslavement and the killing of indigenous peoples spread throughout Europe, both Protestants and Catholics began to work towards translating their liturgies into indigenous languages, with the hopes of converting them. Jesuits, in particular, with their commitment to intellectualism and the study of linguistics, were especially good at this. However, even the most successful among them struggled to translate their theologies, as we can see here. I believe in God, the honored one, all-powerful, who creates the sky and the earth also. I believe in his only child, Jesus Christ, our chief. He is made man by the good spirit of light. The Virgin Mary unintentionally gave birth. Jesus is mistreated on the cross by Captain Pontius Pilate, stretched on the cross, burned, dies, and buried in the earth. He entered into the earth and lived for 3 days. He ascends to heaven to sit with his Father, God, all-powerful. Again, he will come for the purpose of pleasing the living as well as those who have died. I believe his accompanying spirit is good. All over the earth, all will pray. The good things made together will be good things done. What bad things are done will be cleansed, and those who die will all live, and there will be no more death. This is how I feel. But indigenous people also taught colonizers indigenous liturgies. They presented gifts of food, tobacco, and wampum. They used the wampum to wipe the eyes and clear the ears of colonists, and taught them that what was expected of the colonists should they remain on Turtle Island. They presented colonists, first the Dutch and then the English, with a treaty belt. Upon this belt was depicted 2 purple rows upon a white field. The Mohawk called this agreement Gashweta, which means a woman brushing away ashes, cementing in the agreement both the leadership of the community's mothers as well as the metaphors of the edge of the wood ceremony. The Europeans were more literal, naming it the 2-row wampum. Regardless of the name, the treaty's meaning remains clear for indigenous people to this day. We will not be like father and son, but like brothers. Our treaty symbolized 2 paths or 2 vessels traveling down the same river together. One, a birch bark canoe, will be for the Indian people, their laws, their customs, and their ways. The other, a ship, will be for the white people and their laws, their customs, and their ways. We shall each travel the river together, side by side, but in our own boat. Neither of us will make compulsory laws nor interfere in the internal affairs of the other. Neither of us will try to steer the other's vessel. These words became entangled with European metaphors, but the colonists affirmed them. Combining a European technology with an indigenous approach to diplomatic metaphor, the agreement was translated into a covenant chain. Seeing value in such a metaphor, indigenous people adopted it. Meeting in the 2-year-old settlement of Lancaster, the Onondaga diplomat Conestoga spoke these words. It is true that about 100 years ago, the Dutch came here in a ship and brought with them several goods, such as awls, knives, hatchets, guns, and many other particulars, which they gave us. And when they had taught us how to use their things, and we saw what sort of people they were, we were so well pleased with them that we tied their ship to the bushes on the shore. And afterwards, liking them still better and longer, they stayed with us. Liking them still better the longer they stayed with us, and thinking the bushes too slender, we removed the rope and tied it to the trees, And as the trees were liable to be blown down by the high winds or to decay of themselves, we, from the affection we bore them, again removed the rope and tied it to the strong and big rock. And here the interpreter said that they mean Oneida country. And not content with this, for further security, we removed the rope to the big mountain. And here the interpreter says they mean the Onondaga country. And there we tied it very fast and rolled wampum around it. And to make sure it still more secure, we stood upon the wampum and sat down upon it to defend it and to prevent any hurt coming to it. After about 2 years after the arrival of the English, an English governor came to Albany, and finding what great friendship subsisted between us and the Dutch, he approved it mightily and desired to make as strong a league and to be upon as good terms with us as the Dutch were, with whom he was united, and to become one people with us. And by his further care, in looking into what had passed between us, he found that the rope which tied the ship to the great mountain was only fastened with wampum, which was liable to break and rot and to perish in the course of years. He therefore told us he would give us a silver chain, which would be much stronger and which would last forever. This we accepted and fastened the ship with it, and it has lasted ever since. A year later, the British agent William Johnson traveled to Onondaga to affirm these words. You have resolved to take the greatest care of that vessel, that nothing should hurt her, whereupon it was agreed to tie her fast with a great rope to one of the largest nut trees on the bank of the river. But on further consideration, in a fuller meeting, it was thought safest, fearing the wind should blow down that tree, to make a long rope and tie her fast at Onondaga, which was accordingly done. And the rope put under your feet, that if anything hurt or touched the said vessel, by the shaking of the rope you might know it, and then agreed to rise all as one and see what the matter was, and whoever hurt the vessel was to suffer. After this was agreed on and done, you made an offer to the governor to enter into a band of friendship with him and his people, which he was so pleased at that he told you he would find a strong silver chain which would never slip or rust, to bind you and him forever in brothership together, and that your warriors and ours should be as one heart, one head, one blood. Sadly, as Lancaster and the rest of the British colonies grew, those who sought to brighten the chain of friendship became fewer and fewer in number. William Penn sought to establish a peaceable kingdom in the new colony of Pennsylvania. The Susquehannocks by that time had borne the brunt of the Great Dying, the complex of old world pathogens that is estimated to have killed 95% of the pre-contact indigenous population. Those who survived had coalesced into a single community called Conestoga by their new English neighbors, a word derived from the Iroquois language meaning people of the cabin pole. Perhaps as a result of seeing the ways in which their traditional sacred commitments had failed to stave off catastrophic disease, the majority of the Conestogas had converted to Christianity and began to live much as the Europeans did, albeit in a segregated community. They, like Penn, were committed to living peaceably within the new colonial kingdom, and took to calling Penn Onus, which means feather, in a symbolic allusion to the new writing technology that Penn used instead of beaded belts. In return, Penn granted them a 500-acre tract to call their own along the river that now bears their name. Sadly for the peaceable kingdom, William was replaced by his son, Thomas, an Anglican, unlike his Quaker father, who privileged the acquisition of land over his father's ideals. Thomas oversaw the walking purchase in 1737, which dispossessed the Lenape of territory the size of Rhode Island. Reverting back to a logic of Christian possession, in which settlers were entitled to the land that, by their measurement, was going unimproved, Scots-Irish settlers from Ulster soon occupied the so-called backcountry. Concurrently, the population of the Conestoga community continued to shrink. By the 1760s, only 20 Conestogas lived in the community, a far cry from the thousands that had occupied their ancestors' communities only generations earlier. They grew some corn and made brooms and baskets that they then sold to their colonist neighbors. At the same time, the Reverend Thomas Barton, ordained and commissioned by the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel, served as the rector here at St. James. A colonial elite who was well connected to both the political and social circles of Philadelphia. And he also advocated for the establishment of an Indian school. As tensions rose between French and British imperial powers, so too did tensions between settlers, many of whom were illegal squatters, and the Indian allies of the French from the interior of the continent. Maddened by both the lack of support for the defense from Philadelphia and the seemingly illogical preference given by the colony towards the Conestogas in the form of a 500-acre protected settlement for a mere 20 so-called savages, the congregation of Paxton Presbyterian Church, led by the fighting parson, the Reverend John Elder, came upon a genocidal solution. They were going to murder the Conestoga Indians. When they arrived at Conestoga on December 14th, 1763, the Paxton boys made quick work of murdering the 6 Indians present at the time, and burned the village to the ground. The rest of the community had gone into Lancaster to sell their wares. Word of the attack spread to Lancaster, and the remaining 14 Indians were placed within the workhouse for their own protection. However, more than a week later, on December 27th, as the people of Lancaster celebrated Christmas in their churches, the Paxton boys stormed the workhouse and killed the remaining Indians. But the genocidal fury of the Paxton boys was not yet sated. They then marched to Philadelphia, next seeking out Moravian Indian converts who had moved there for their own protection. This march served as a catalyst for what has been termed a pamphlet war, in which Philadelphia elites debated whether the Paxton boys threatened the very establishment of colonial order or were justified in their actions. Benjamin Franklin, for one, wrote a scathing critique of the Paxton boys. However, coming to the defense of the Paxton boys was an anonymously penned pamphlet titled "The Conduct of the Paxton Men Impartially Represented." However, this text is almost universally attributed to Reverend Martin. When the frontiers were yet reeking with the blood of the slaughtered inhabitants, and the murdered ghosts of the friends and relatives cried aloud for vengeance, a number of Indians, many of which were concerned in this horrid butchery, were escorted to the metropolis, and protected, cherished, and maintained in luxury and idleness, whilst they, the poor sufferers, were abandoned to misery and left to starve or beg their bread. A mighty noise and hubbub has been made about killing a few Indians in Lancaster County, and even philosophers and legislators have been employed to raise the halloo upon those who had killed them. Why? That the white savages of Paxton and Donegal have violated the laws of hospitality? Now, I have been frequently informed for many years by sundry of their nearest neighbors in the Conestoga Manor that they were a drunken, debauched, insolent, quarrelsome crew. That ever since the commencement of the war, they have been in trouble and terror to all around them. But not everyone agreed with Reverend Martin's assessment of the Conestoga residents. Rhoda Barber, a young woman at the time, recalled, "They were here when the first white settlers came. They were entirely peaceable and seemed as much afraid of other Indians as the whites were." But she also remembered the many armed men who entered her childhood home seeking warmth and refreshment from her father. While they warmed themselves, they inquired why the Indians were suffered to live peaceably here. My father told them that they were quite inoffensive, living on their own land and injuring no one. They asked what would be the consequences were they destroyed. My father told them he thought they would be as liable to punishment as if they had destroyed so many whites. They were of a different opinion at length. At length, they went away without telling what they had been about. After they were gone, my brothers said they had tomahawks tied to their saddles and they were bloody. They also had Christie's gun. Christie was a little Indian boy about the age of my brothers. They were much attached to him. He was their playmate in all their sports, made their bows and arrows, and was indeed as a brother. While they wondered what it could mean, a messenger came, giving information of the dreadful deed. My father and some others went down to see them buried. Shocking indeed was the sight. The dead bodies lay among the rubbish of their burnt cabins like half consumed logs. The merciless wretches, not satisfied with their first work, went thither and broke open the jail, and cruelly and in a shocking manner destroyed them all, old men and women and children. The Paxton Boys, after the dreadful massacre in Lancaster, made boast. Now they had gotten as many scalps, they would go to Philadelphia, and the Quakers would share the same fate. So it was that the Ongwe left this place. Descendants of the first people either moved north and joined the Haudenosaunee, or moved westward, joining with the Shawnee. Meanwhile, Pennsylvania colonialism continued to expand. The British made efforts to contain the westward flow of squatters, passing the Proclamation Line of 1763 that forbade white settlement in newly acquired British territories west of the Appalachian Mountains. But this proclamation only angered the Paxtonites and their like all the more. By 1776, this anger had reached a new boiling point, and there, listed next to more familiar grievances cited in the Declaration of Independence, such as the forced housing of soldiers, taxation without representation, and the denial of a trial by jury, is a single line that directly echoed the defenders of the Paxton Boys. The king has excited domestic insurrections among us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions.